Hi, everybody. I'm Nick Mathewson. I've been doing stuff with Tor for the last 20 some years. We make privacy software, and I'm going to tell you about a lot of stuff that we learned along the way today. I'm going to try to be interesting. I don't know that I'll be super deep on stuff, but I hope that everybody will have fun and maybe there will be something cool to take away. Can I advance slides? Yes. I should say that although I am speaking about Tor experience, I'm not officially speaking on behalf of Tor. Opinions are my own, especially if they are combative or stupid opinions. Does anyone know how to make Zoom controls go away? Well, we'll hope. We'll hope. All right. This talk is, like I said, attempted inspiration, more so than detailed technical argument. I think I can justify the points I'm making with detailed argument and more examples, but I don't think I can do that in a 15-minute presentation. What I'm going to try to inspire everyone to do is to build tools, to deploy them, if you're already deploying them, to deploy them to more people, to maintain them longer than you would otherwise, and to engage with more and broader communities. I'm focusing centrally, but not exclusively, on folks with an academic focus in their lives right now. But if you don't have just an academic focus, this might still be interesting. What am I going to claim that you get if you build more and deploy more and so on? I'm going to claim you'll find new problems. And what's more, you will find new problems that other people in your field do not imagine because they are still working on sort of the high school physics version of the problem space, where you assume that everyone is a perfect sphere and you assume that nothing has friction and so on. But real life engineering is all about shapes and realities. You will disprove common wisdom and find places where everybody was wrong, which, if we are, being a little bit selfish here, that will give you the paper that gets cited every time somebody wants to show that what we thought before was wrong. It's loads of fun. Actually, a lot of people have spoken to me over the course of this workshop about feeling that they want to have more impact, that they want to actually feel connected to the folks that they got into cryptography to help. And the way to do that is not by working on a slightly different equation or having a slightly different group of people in the conference room, I'm going to say. I'm going to say it's reaching out and doing something slightly more applied than you were before. You don't have to go all the way to deploying it and making yourself a startup or a nonprofit or whatever, but just a little farther and you'll get a little more involved and a little more knowledgeable. And yes, this is a sneaky way to smuggle context into your research, because the new problems that you say you will find and the common wisdom you say you will disprove is a great excuse for your advisor or tenure committee, when in fact what you're trying to do is to have real social impact, which unfortunately you may not be able to sell to your advisor or your tenure committee. And am I going to be able to say all of that in 15 minutes? I don't think so, but I'm going to do my best. So there's an old story, sometimes told as a joke or a parable or whatever. There's a drunk person looking for their keys under a lamppost. Someone else comes along and helps them look for their keys, and after a while asks them, "So you dropped your keys here?" And they say, "No, I dropped my keys over there." "Well, why are we looking here?" "Because the light is so much better." And research fields over time tend to get into a state where they're looking where the light is good. They're looking at a position where everything is tractable and the math works out nice, and you can make clean arguments and get nice proofs, regardless of whether there's any benefit. And I've been there. I kind of came from a more research focus on privacy because, I had no experience when I was started. All I had was the research literature. So one example of how this came up was how we diluted the research community's mixednet focus by starting on Tor stuff. Just an aside, most of my examples are going to be Tor related because that's what I know best and I'm most confident that I have the story right. I hope I get to do a longer version of this talk sometime where I have lots of other examples, but mostly it'll be stuff I know this time. So mixednets, they're a means of doing traffic anonymization where you gather a bunch of messages, you basically reorder them, scramble them, and send them out after a delay. The delay is critical, and the message-based aspect of that is critical. And the way things that stood when we started promoting Tor in the mixednet literature was mixednets really were a big part of the focus of the privacy community. And that makes sense. They are the research privacy community. They are theoretically very tractable. You can prove great things about them. You can analyze them using incredibly nice tools. They have reasonably well-defined security properties that you can make proofs about. And when you can't make proofs about them, you can analyze them in terms of entropy and uncertainty. And isn't that great? But when we actually started trying to deploy stuff, like I wrote a mixnet. I wrote a mixnet-based remailer called MixMinion. It was supposed to be the successor to one called Mixmaster that was a big deal in the 90s. And I will still argue that it's technically superior, but it doesn't matter because no one actually wanted mixnets. I was like trying to promote my mixnet everywhere, tell everybody that it was better than the existing ones, and people from the remailer community tried it, but there was practically no one in the remailer community. And it turns out it wasn't, people would say, oh, that's just because the usability sucks, but it wasn't the usability, it was the utility. As they stood, these were tools where if you used them right, you could send a message that would arrive in a number of hours and then get blocked as spam. And if it didn't get blocked as spam, the person who received it would have no way to reply without special software. This was a lot less useful than this other side project of a friend of mine was doing called Tor, which I joined in on. And Tor people actually wanted because it could do stuff like web browsing and it could do stuff like chatting. And that was useful and people were actually using it. But once we got into that field, though, we found that we needed really different analytic tools. And that's great because we got to play a part in defining those analytic tools and we got to talk to people about the analytic tools. And that was exciting and it was influential and it was fun. And this helped us find a lot of undiscovered gaps in the research. Here is the obligatory XKCD cartoon with a caption changed. So in the early days of Tor stuff, we had to revisit a lot of existing privacy analysis things. Like I mentioned before about provable results on mixnets, but a lot of those provable results, and unfortunately, I would say a lot of provable results on communication systems in the cryptography literature today are only proofs under a set of assumptions that are frankly ridiculous. They have to assume things like there is a number of participants on the network that is the same from the start of time to the end of time. There is a number of users on the network who are the same from the start of time to the end of time. You have to get all of your users on day one and none of them can quit. The network must be perfect. None of these users is allowed to turn off their computer or else the proof fails. None of these users is allowed to reboot or else the proof fails. Or another way to get around a lot of that, you can relax those first three assumptions if you just revise your system in terms of one-shot usage. This system will be constructed in however many person months of effort, and then it will be used once and thrown away and never used again. And under those circumstances, we can prove security. But when you actually want to say to your users, what kind of security are you providing me? Or when they ask that question, you can say, well, at first we would have to say things like, well, we're not giving you that perfect security because we aren't doing the classic assumptions under this and we're giving you a more useful thing. But over time, we realized that the environments where the classic assumptions applied are non-existent and may in many cases not be things that could be defined. So the analysis got messier, yes, but it got more useful. And in a lot of ways, it got more interesting. If you're only happy with proofs, this may not be the direction you want to go in. But if you're happy with confidence, with probability, with applying things to the real world, then you can actually make a lot of progress. So another thing that happened to us when we started like applying stuff and getting more users is we found that once you have a couple thousand people using your software, you don't get to script what they do. There was a ridiculous incident in Scotland earlier this year where somebody made a fraudulent off-brand Willy Wonka experience and invited some kids in and ripped them off and gave them a horrible time. And among the 1,000 things that were wrong with it is they used an AI script to tell the performers what to say. It was an AI generated script. But one of the things they did that I think is a good example to keep in mind for research is the script included the audience reactions. Like at this point, an audience member will say, "Ooh, how amazing." like it says right in the script, and that's not something that the AI thinks you can do that, but no. So you can't actually script what your users want to do. They pick up the artifact that you have made. You can tell them what you think it's for, but if you give them a frying pan and they want to use it to pound a cutlet flat, that's what it's for. If you give them a floor cleaner and they decide that it is a mighty chariot, then that's what it is for. One example that, should have been obvious was people won't want to use Tor for multiple applications at once. They'll want to have their web browser open. They'll want to be visiting an email website. They'll want to be using a mail client. They'll want to be visiting a couple other websites. One of them has the login. They'll want to be using a chat thing. All of those kind of need to be unlinked to each other. Like, we'd like to have a property where if you are logging into this website and you're logging into that website, there's not some single point on the Tor network you're leaving from that can correlate your traffic to both and realize this is the same user. And it took us a few years to actually design that because operating systems don't give you a way to ask which application is this coming from. This is for proxy stuff, at least they didn't at the time. Things are a little bit better on some operating systems. And the web browsers didn't give you a way to distinguish what's coming from this tab, what's coming from that tab. We had to figure out, are tabs even the right answer? Should everything that comes from the same tab go over the same Tor circuit? That was a research thing that nobody had really asked before because it was kind of too far in the weeds, because it was driven by actual user behavior rather than like perfect spherical user behavior. I'm not going to tell you the answers to all of these questions. In this case, I think we have a good answer, but I think you'll have more fun thinking about good answers for them than you actually would hearing them in some cases. A much larger example was censorship avoidance. We did not go into this whole Tor game like thinking that we were going to talk about avoiding censorship. We thought, well, isn't TLS the same everywhere? Isn't one TLS client basically the same as the other? So all we need to do is just keep a few secret entry points to the network and nobody's just going to block TLS. It turns out that one TLS client does not look like another, especially before TLS 1.3. And we got blocked based on the basis of so many factors. If you want, you can ask me the story sometime of like how I accidentally got a prime number to be banned over the Iranian internet. But it was a nice prime number too. But after a few examples of this, we sort of realized that no, anti-censorship is what a big part of what our users want our tool for. It needs to be part of what our tool does and incorporates. It needs to be part of our core story. And we can't just leave it, say, well, if you want anti-censorship, use something else. Because in a lot of cases, in nearly all cases, the people who need censorship resistance also need privacy. And these something else's that people were spinning up weren't giving them privacy. So protecting our users really required us to expand our research focus and become experts on other stuff that we weren't even aware of before. Like when we started, we were aware of the steganography research, but steganography at the time was mainly focused on hiding messages in data at rest, not in making one kind of traffic look like another kind of traffic. That was all very ad hoc papers by people who were like trying to tunnel things over SSH and catch hackers tunneling things over SSH. And speaking of the attackers, and speaking of threat models, if you can identify this threat model or this threatening model, please let me know afterwards. I know where I got that image. And if you recognize it, then good for you. But real attackers follow a lot of motivations that you might not anticipate. They go for the exposed resources. No, I'm not just looking for excuses to use more cat pictures, but okay, I am looking for, anyway. So in nearly every case, if you were to take every system that was built or not built, discussed at this workshop, and you were to build and deploy every single one of them, I would bet you that in 19 cases out of 20, the first successful attack will be against something not even discussed in the talk, not discussed in the paper. It will be whatever was not considered. When we were building Tor, the attacks we considered were classic active and passive attacks by parties by parties on the internet against the infrastructure of the network. So traffic watching, traffic injection. These were the things that we designed for, and we had great stories about perfect forward secrecy and making sure that when a relay was compromised, future traffic wouldn't get. Nobody bothered to do that. That was what we expected, but what we got was so many application attacks. Like, this, when we were starting, remember, this was before the 2010s, when when all the major browser vendors got serious about enforcing TLS after the Snowden revelations. This was in the early 2000s, where you didn't even get a pop-up warning when you were visiting an HTTP site. You just didn't have a lock. And if you went to an HTTPS site and it didn't work, you'd see a warning that didn't make any sense to you. You'd click the button and you go through anyway. So, what we got was just tons and tons of application attacks where you get downgraded to regular HTTP, you get served a different and then you get served a different website. And we didn't so much get active attacks by people outside of the network. We just got people who would participate in the network because that was so much easier. It is really easy to volunteer for a volunteer network. It is way harder than it is to compromise somebody else's system. And, so that's the kind of thing we had to turn around and actually work on. And a lot of that work is stuff that, would not have happened if we hadn't deployed, because honestly, it isn't as theoretically interesting and it isn't as much something you could write about, but it's there and it's pretty neat. Another expectation we had at the beginning was that we would win against the attacker or we would lose. In cryptography, you assume, all right, they can mount a attack against this or they can't. Yes, you assume some number of plain text and some probability, but you generally assume it's broken or it's not. What we found, though, is even when you're winning in a probabilistic scenario, as you are in this, if you have an attacker who controls some part of the network, they will see some fraction, they will be able to trace some fraction of the traffic. Even for an attacker like that, you still need to play the game. You can't just say, we're losing against that attacker 5% of the time. Too bad, we're winning 95% of the time. No, and the reason is, it turns out that attacker who sees 5% of the traffic, over time, will see a sample of 5% of all of the traffic. Statistics works. If people have reliable patterns and I get to see 5% of what you're doing, I get to infer all of your associations and habits that you do on a regular basis. So we needed to adopt existing techniques. In our case, it was something called helper nodes that we later turned into guard nodes in our design to defeat these sampling-based techniques and make sure that a 5% attacker stays at 5% and doesn't grow over time into a 100% successful attacker. Even then, we couldn't use the research as it was, but because, again, it assumed a fixed network that never changed, and it made a few other assumptions that we needed to adjust. How much time have I got?
I think,
Any?
sure, I think maybe a few more minutes.
Well,
I think a couple more minutes.
all right. Then let me leave you with a metaphor that I think is helpful. The cryptography in cryptographic software is like the carrots in carrot cake. It is a small fraction of the whole. If you tried to make a carrot cake that was 100% carrots, you would not be making a cake. Still, it's essential. It's not carrot cake without the carrots. And what's more, it affects the rest of the recipe. You have different amounts of moisture coming in. There's some ingredients that work well with carrot cake. You need a more muffin-like batter and so on. An example that came up with Tor that was fairly surprising is that one of the features in TLS was actually very insecure with Tor usage. So if we jump back to the 90s, everybody's random number generator was presumed probably broken. So the designers of, I think, SSL2 or SSL3 said, all right, we need to make sure that this one field we're sending in the clear, we're called client random or server random, we've got to make sure that that's unique. We're going to do that by telling everyone, stick a timestamp at the beginning of it. So even if your random number generator is broken, you'll still get a unique client hello. It turns out that that's very bad for something like Tor, because people still didn't have accurate clocks. People still don't have accurate clocks. Although running NTP is more common than it used to be. But if you're the person who's off by 14 seconds, then every time you make a TLS connection with one of these old versions of TLS, you are broadcasting, hi, I'm 14 seconds ahead. And you're doing that both through the TLS connections you launch with a local client from your computer and from the ones you're launching over Tor. And that makes all of your stuff over Tor linkable, and it makes it linkable with the stuff on your computer. And, that's awful. Fortunately, TLS 1.3 doesn't have that problem anymore, and we managed to like get the major TLS libraries to stop doing it. But, we didn't think we would need to have to tamper with TLS. There's a very interesting example also where the standard solutions for efficient network traffic don't actually work all that well in a Tor environment. I can only give you a brief glimpse of this, but it's kind of neat. So regular TCP gets you fairly efficient end-to-end reliable communications by using an unreliable out-of-order substrate, which is IAP packets. You can't build something Tor-like that way so easily. I mean, you might think, well, we'll redefine Tor so that Tor provides an unreliable out-of-order transport, and we'll get all the performance benefits of not having to guarantee every packet to go through, and we'll get our reliability end-to-end. It sounds good, but when you remove the reliable in-order property, you're giving every party in the middle an opportunity to reorder traffic and to drop traffic in any pattern that they want. They can drop patterns of traffic to spell out messages in binary to each other across the ends of the communication, or they can do something more subtle. But it creates a means for signal injection of arbitrary amounts over your supposedly private channel. So we need to come back and just rethink the whole approach of reliable over unreliable as an approach for getting good performance. Final side note. Is this my final side note or am I lying? Can I do 2 more slides? No more?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, we might just be short on questions, but.
All right, cool. Come to me after if you have questions or send me email. There is no chance that yours will be the most off-topic or silly question I've had this month or this week. So lots of folks say our app is for the most vulnerable users. So we're never going to have more than like a few handful of people. And here's an alpha for testing. And here is our deployed system for testing. And, clearly, although only like a few thousand people will ever use this, they are the most vulnerable and critical people. I don't think this is a good approach. I think for testing stuff, you need to find a diverse community to test with. And that means growing your base of applications. That means if you've designed a system and you think your system is mainly for abuse victims, find other things that it's useful for too. This is valuable not only for the testing approach, but also because for vulnerable users, a system is safer if it is also used by a lot of people who are not in the same category as them. It is safer to use a privacy tool that says this is a privacy tool for regular people than it is to use a privacy tool that says this is a hacktivist weapon on it, and people will act accordingly. Also, you have more downstream users for your research than you think. That is, it's not just your tools and the users who use them, but the researchers who you want to learn from your tools. Reach out from them, find out whether they're like picking up what you did. If not, treat that as a usability question. The people who make the next tools, reach out for them. See if they can actually use your results. If you would have hoped that they would use your results, but they didn't, treat that as a problem that can also be solved. The people who serve the people you're researching, this is more for the people who are doing like human factors research, but like if you have done a great work on usability and nobody in the field is actually like using your usability results, that's your next usability thing. Look at the usability of your usability. Reach out to the cryptographers who you would like to be taking into account your usability results and find out what isn't usable about them for them. Why Johnny can't help Johnny encrypt.
Okay.
And yeah, if we had time for discussion, I would be asking, what did you not see coming? But I think we might be out of time. Yeah, I hope this has fired somebody up to write a little more code than they would otherwise, or like look for someone who actually would, if you've invented a great identity card system, see like, well, maybe we can use this in my research group. if you've like come up with a chat system, think, why am I not using my chat system every day? And just get a little more applied, get a little more dirty. You find great things in the mud. There's archaeology and geology and stuff down here. Thanks so much for listening. And